What's up, you guys? Tim Trevathan with Tim Trevathan Homes on another Back to the Basics video. Yes, for many months now, over 2 years worth of video content, I have not done this topic, which to me is a no-brainer. It's the process of buying a house. And I know those that are watching, they're looking to buy a house, move to Georgia, whether you're local or out of state or even in another country, that it matters to know the buying process. Well, here is the information for it. This one in particular, in this video, we're gonna cover the offer process. What does it look like in the actual offer? So we're gonna dive in right now. So when it comes to putting an offer on a house, all the other videos that I've done for Back to the Basics will cover a lot of other things. So as far as this one goes, I wanna go over the purchase and sale agreement. That's what we're gonna hone in and look at. So the purchase and sale agreement is the official Georgia real estate form that we use to submit an offer on a property. I've got one in front of me right now. And at the top there, let's just break it down from top to bottom. And this is a 10-page form. The purchase and sale agreement is a 10-page offer form, but the bulk of what you will find for the offer details is found on this first page. So we'll just knock it out. At the very top there, it has the offer date that you're offering on the property, followed by the property address, and then the legal description that you can find in the tax records, followed by the purchase price, what you are offering to the seller, followed by closing cost. Closing cost is typically 3% of the purchase price. So if you're offering $400,000 on a home, for example, then you're looking at about $12,000 in closing costs plus prepaid expenses. One thing that buyers think when it comes to closing costs is they assume or expect that the seller's going to cover it. Well, in a buyer's market, yes. On a home that's been sitting on the market for 60 days or more, probably quite a bit. But never have I seen all the closing costs covered outright in the initial offer. In combination with a credit towards closing costs during inspection negotiations, maybe it can come out to that full 3%. But basically, you want to budget for that. Your down payment based off of the offer price, let's say if it's a 20% down payment, 20% of $400,000 plus 3% closing costs. That is worst case scenario, what you're looking at to purchase a home here in Georgia. Then you got the closing date in number 4 there. And typically it takes about 30 days to close on a home. If you want to be competitive, where sometimes sellers want to have a quicker closing, you could do 21 days. I've got lenders that can help and attorneys that can help get this process all completed within 21 days. But usually it's 30 days. So that will allow for time for the loan to get final approval and do all the other parts of the process like appraisal and inspection period and getting ready to move and have the seller move out and so forth. And then when it comes to the possession time, because there's two different things. Closing and possession. A lot of times people think it's synonymous, but not always. You can close on a home and then get the keys at closing, which is the typical way. That would be a closing and possession time on the same day. But if you have a closing, say on Friday, and then a possession time for 3 days later on a Monday, that means you close on the home on Friday, but you cannot move in to the home until 3 days later. And you might be asking, well, when does that happen and why does that happen? Well, basically, that will involve another form, which we can cover in another video, called the temporary occupancy exhibit. What that means is that you agree ahead of time, the buyer and seller, that you as the buyer, once you close on the home, you're gonna legally allow the seller to continue living in that home for another 3 days so that they can go and buy another home or move out or whatever it may be, so that you can wait and then move in once they move out. You'll do a final walkthrough, and then you'll do another walkthrough right when they're about to move out. I would say a temporary occupancy situation happens about 15% of the time, so it's not that common. Most of the time, you're gonna see a closing date and possession time at the same time, on the same day. Then in number 5, you got what's called the closing law firm. You gotta choose a closing attorney ahead of time, and you as the buyer can do that. That's a great thing here in Georgia. You could choose it from the buyer's side. Sometimes the seller may have a preferred closing attorney. Doesn't always mean that you need to go with it if you already have a good one that you want to work with. Or you may want to go with the seller's preferred closing attorney if it means helping your offer get accepted in a multiple offer situation. Now, one way that I would say we need to close with this particular attorney is if I have like a client who is more fluent in a different language other than English, such as Korean or Spanish, then I'll have an attorney that I know that can speak that language, and so that it could be a smoother process at closing for them. I have a few closing attorneys that I like here in Georgia, O'Kelly and Sorahan, Drillich Law Firm, as well as Adair and Baker. There's a lot of good ones out there, honestly, and I have had very few complaints as far as my experiences with closing attorneys here in Georgia. Number 6, when it comes to holding the earnest money, now you could get your own broker to hold the earnest money. A lot of times I just have the earnest money go to the closing attorney, I wire it to them and they hold it. That amount of the earnest money goes towards the down payment. So you're not losing it, it's not a sunk cost, it goes towards your down payment. And this basically says to the seller that the buyer is serious and that the buyer is willing to risk that if they don't get the loan or the appraisal comes in lower and there's no agreement made, you want to back out and get your earnest money back, then you can. But in some cases you can. If you were to waive it, for example, well, then this is a way that it protects the seller. Now, sometimes people may ask, well, why don't you have your own brokerage, your agent's brokerage, hold the earnest money? For sure, that could be an option, and I've done it before. And in some cases, and really I've only run into this case once in 8 years, so this is why I'm not really like that urgent to have my brokerage hold earnest money. But in this one case, it made sense to, because the seller, once we terminated the contract, did not want to sign the termination, even though it was unilateral termination where we initiate it and they don't have to sign. In order to disperse the earnest money on the bottom of this one unilateral termination form, they do have to sign that part in order for the attorney to release the earnest money to go back to my buyer, to be reimbursed in full to my buyer. It's the attorney's choice if they want to or not, depending on who signs this form, if the seller does or not. But my brokerage, if they know full aware, and again, attorney in this case, they obliged in the end, but for whatever reason, they're taking the side of the seller during due diligence when they can back out. But if we had it locked in and deposited with my brokerage, they would know good and well we're within our due diligence period, which we have the legal right to back out, get our earnest money back during that time. So of course, we're gonna give it back to Tim's buyer in full. So that would be one case of why you wanna go with the brokerage as the holder of the earnest money. Now, speaking of earnest money, how much earnest money do you need to deposit and what's the purpose of it? Again, it's to show that to the seller that the buyer's serious. As far as the amount, usually you're looking at about 1% of the purchase price. So if it's a $400,000 home, then your earnest money is gonna be $4,000. Now, can that amount be more or less? Yes. If it is less, you're probably gonna get a counter back from the seller with a larger amount so that it could protect them in case something goes wrong. But if anything, if it does change, it usually means more. And I'm talking anywhere from 1.5 to 2 times more. And it depends. If you're in a multiple offer situation, I've seen having to put down 2% earnest money. So $8,000 in this case, if it's a $400,000 home, just to lock it in. Now, some new construction builders require a big earnest money deposit anyway. I've seen some as big as $25,000. And even in this current market, the recording of this video, I see some that do 10 or 15,000, depending on the builder, such as Taylor Morrison. And so again, it goes towards the down payment, but it's a bigger amount that you need up front. And you wanna make sure that you don't back out with new construction because you lose that earnest money in new construction. But again, we're talking about the purchase and sale agreement for a resale home. So with a due diligence period in place, you can always get your earnest money back during that time if you back out. Speaking of which, there's a due diligence period number 8, where you have the right to inspect the home. How do you know how many days? Well, back in 2016, when I first started, 12 days was common. Then in 2021, when things got heated in the market, we would see that 5 days, sometimes 3 days, sometimes 0 days, where they would have to waive the due diligence period. But now in this current market in 2024, I would say anywhere from 5 to 7 days is common. It's good to have that because you need to inspect the home. And if you want to know more about due diligence period and what that process looks like, be sure to click on that other video and take a look. Number 9 is lead-based paint. This has to do with a toxic paint that had lead built into it that was commonly used in homes prior to 1978. I think I've only had 2 contracts, maybe 3 contracts in 8 years that had a home where the buyer bought that was that old, that we would have to have a separate exhibit to acknowledge that there may be lead-based paint still in that home or not. But more often than not, you would check mark was not built prior to 1978. Then you've got the brokerages involved. the buyer agent or buyer broker representing the buyer as a client, and then the listing broker or listing agent representing the seller as a client. There are two separate brokerages representing the buyer and seller. Then you have a material relationship, which has to do with, do you have a buyer that you're representing who is a family member? Well, then you need to disclose that. Or do they have an active real estate license in another state? You have to basically disclose that. So those are certain things that you need to disclose. Otherwise, you just put none. And then the time limit of offer. Oftentimes, I do a 24-hour time limit. So that is the time that the seller has to respond to our offer with either accepting it, rejecting it, or countering it. Now, if you look towards the end of the purchase and sale agreement, in the next to last page, you see all these exhibits and addenda. A lot of these exhibits are part of the offer and then become a legally binding contract once all parties sign. And these exhibits, a lot of the common ones that I would use would be agreement that the closing attorney acts as the holder of earnest money, or a loan contingency exhibit, whether it's conventional FHA or VA, and then also other ones like the seller's property disclosure that's filled out by the seller, and a community association disclosure that is filled out by the seller that involves the HOA. What are the costs associated with the HOA? What does it cover? How often is it paid? Are there any annual assessments that need to be done as far as repairs in the neighborhood? And the property disclosure, going back to that, is an important document because yes, you will do an inspection, so you will know the age of things such as the water heater or HVAC anyway. But a disclosure is very helpful because you can find out some of this information before putting an offer, and depending on this information, it can dictate what kind of offer price you're going to submit. So for example, this is the form that the sellers fill out of their own home, and it may say the roof is 20 years old. Well, you know it's getting close to the end of its lifespan, so maybe you want to offer $10,000 below asking price to budget for the replacement of a roof in the near future. Does that mean your offer will get accepted? Well, in a multiple offer situation, probably not. But if you are the only offer, then you can use that as kind of a negotiation tactic or strategy to help get a lower offer price accepted. It may also have other things in there, such as the age of the roof, water heater, HVAC. Were there any prior insurance claims? Was there any litigation claims? Does it have a termite bond on the property and termite protection or not? What remains with the property? They check mark what stays with the property. A lot of times, 50% chance with a refrigerator and washer and dryer as to whether or not they stay. The other appliances in the kitchen almost always stay, including a dishwasher, stove, range, oven, and a microwave. It will also show things like, is the home vacant? Well, if so, how long has it been vacant? Were there any structural add-ons or improvements, such as a deck, an awning, a porch or something that needs to be disclosed, and it needs to show that there was a permit there as well. So these are a lot of things that you can find in the disclosure form prior to the inspection and prior to submitting an offer. If you like this video, like and subscribe. And if you're looking to make a move to Georgia, be sure to give me a call. I do these videos for a reason because I like to help people make their move to Georgia, whether it's out of state or locally within state, or even if they're looking to sell a home. I enjoy helping buyers and sellers in this area of Metro Atlanta. So give me a call. Hope to hear from you. I want to represent you. Catch you on the next video.